Okay, so for my final project for this class, I actually decided to use the studio project that I'm currently working on. And in our studio project, the original idea was to create an RTS similar to Age of Empires. This is an older version of the project because what's happened since then is we've refactored the entire game to be more of a tower defense game, and we've rewritten a lot of our code, but a lot of this old code contains some of the requirements for this class and some of the more complicated concepts. So when I run the game, it generates a random map. Got buildings and stuff that were just for testing, but for the most part it's got trees, it's got different land types and rocks and decorations and things like that. And then of course you also have a unit that can move around and can be selected, has a shader, everything like that. But this was just a pretty early build before we had really fleshed things out. So if we go into the code here, we can actually show off some of the more complicated things that we worked on. So the unit is one of the most complicated objects that we had programmed in the game. And as you can see, we made extensive use of namespaces with nested namespaces to contain the different classes necessary. So for example, within the namespace ages, we also had the namespace units, and everything relating to units was in that namespace. As for coroutines, we hardly used them, but the places that we had planned to use them was here in the load scene on click script, which would use a coroutine for switching between rooms, and the other place was in the building script, so that when building a building, it would use a coroutine instead of checking constantly whether the building is actually being built. Interfaces are another thing that didn't get massive use in our project, but actually got use in our key listener and key hook system or for key bindings in the game. So essentially we wanted hotkeys so that the player could control everything with the keyboard. So the only interface that we really used in the game was only pretty much to reference as a type, not really to require any functions or anything like that. So here we define the key listener, and then inside the key bindings, you can see that we have an array of key listeners, and we use key listeners all the time, just as the type. Getters and setters are something that we use all over the game. If we go back to our unit, we've got like things like the velocity, where it's got get, and inside the get it has functions, or it has it does different things, and the set does different things. We have just regular gets and sets as well, but they're used pretty much all over the project. And scriptable objects are the last main requirement, and actually something that I really wish I had known about and had used in this project. So they actually did not get use in this version because I didn't know about them at the time, but I plan on using them in the future versions of this game. What we actually ended up doing in this to sort of do the exact same thing as scriptable objects was we created a data file and a data parser. So if we go to the assets folder, resources, units.dat, so we actually wrote a data file style so that you could create something like this that defines a villager and then some attributes to it, like resources, how many types of resources it has, and things like this. And then you could make this for different types of units, and when you create those types of units, it sets them, just essentially in the same way that a scriptable object does, except 10 times more complicated for no particular reason, because we didn't know about scriptable objects. Now on to the optional topics that we covered. So right away, if we go back to our unit, you'll see that we were using delegates. We use delegates in multiple different places, but this is where they're most significant, is using delegates for events. And speaking of events, we did a lot of event-driven programming for this project. So pretty much most of the way that the unit functions is based on events. So bit masking didn't really get a use in our project, but it sort of did, because what I found out when working on this project is that the layers in Unity are actually bit masked. So when I created a function that finds the camera center point, I was specifically casting a ray for a specific layer. And to get that layer, I had to use bit shifting, which I used right here. And that's after I found out that it was a bit mask. As well, in this project, we had Garrett Haynes on our team, who's a very talented Unity programmer. He was doing all of these custom attributes to change things in the editor long before I even knew how to do that. So these custom editor scripting pieces are built by him, and they've been really helpful. But yeah, that's about it for this project. We made use of a few other things as well, but these are the most significant, I think. And yeah, it was a great learning experience, and working with some other programmers that really knew more than me was a really great way to learn the concepts in this class and to be able to actually see them in use.